Albert Einstein once counseled that first you have to learn the rules of the game, and then you have to play better than anyone else. Which begs the question, how does one learn the rules of life? Maybe from church? And have you ever wondered where some religious rules come from? I can tell you they aren't all directly from the Bible. When I was in grammar school, we had to take square dancing lessons in physical education. And one of my classmates got an exemption because dancing was against her religion. So back then, the rest of the class wanted to join her church. And denominations have different rules concerning the fruit of the vine, if you know what I mean. I knew a man who once wasn't very religious until he went to a Presbyterian potluck dinner. Afterwards, he said, "They're normal. They drink beer." When I was in seminary, I asked a Methodist friend if Methodists were allowed to drink, and she said, "Not in front of each other." Now, the Bible does contain lists of thou shalts and thou shall nots. Yet that is not the way Jesus begins his teaching on the rules of life in the Sermon on the Mount. Instead, Jesus offers a vision of what life will be like for the righteous before he gives the instructions on righteousness. First, Jesus describes situations where folks find themselves not necessarily in circumstances they would choose. No one really wants to be poor in spirit, or to have to mourn, or to be meek. Yet Christ offers a hope-filled promise that when you do find yourself in these situations, you will find blessing when you have faith and trust in God. And as many of you know through personal experience, God's blessing is ours through human agency, through the web of connections we share, and when we treat one another as God's instrument of grace, Christ among us and in us. Being poor in spirit is often preached as being spiritually bereft, which at one time or another we could find ourselves in. But Jesus also includes here the actual poor whose spirits are crushed by poverty. Jesus isn't prescribing that we become poor, but we can be blessings to those who are physically poor, which First Presbyterian does through funding many of their outreach initiatives like Arundel House of Hope or Lighthouse Shelter, ACT, the Anne Arundel Communities Together, Habitat for Humanity, and your global outreach to places like Rwanda, Cuba, the Czech Republic, Haiti, and Guatemala. And I'm sure there are many ways that you each reach out that I don't even know about. Today, Jesus pronounces blessing on those who, for the sake of the kingdom, turn to God for what they need each and every day. And while we here may not be living paycheck to paycheck, but when we consider our Generations of Generosity estimate for this year, I hope you'll think about being an agent of blessing and whether your estimate brings you close to those who must place their trust in God to supply what they need. On this All Saints' Day, we often link the significance of reading the Beatitudes to blessed are those who mourn, because we most often think of mourning as something that happens upon the death of a loved one. And it's true. Losing someone you love is a loss that is never forgotten. Being assured of blessing is a promise we hold tight to because we need the blessing of each other's comfort to fill that gap that is left in our hearts. Yet there's another dimension to mourning. We also mourn events that forever change us. A devastating illness, a divorce, an estrangement from family or friends. And there's such a thing as corporate mourning. such as when hate and guns walk together into a workplace, a school, or a place of worship. Think about Las Vegas, Orlando, Aurora. We mourn that we're not safe when we recreate. Columbine, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, Stoneman Douglas High School. We mourn that our children are not safe at school. Don't we mourn a current social contract, the rules of life, that seem that society cares more about the right to own a gun than it does our children? Sutherland Springs Church, Charleston Church, Tree of Life Synagogue. We mourn that we're not safe even when we worship. Your trustees are working on an emergency plan in case hate and a gun walk together into this campus. People of faith in God's goodness are experiencing a collective mourning of the violence the world inflicts on all of us. Violence that we can't forget and carnage that can't be repaired. And I'm reminded by folks with a skin color darker than mine that we might join those who mourn the preschool to prison pipeline that many people of color still experience. Current studies are finding that children of color experience a type of racial profiling as early as preschool. They're singled out and punished for infractions that their peers are often not punished for, causing them to internalize their self-understanding of being bad, and so perpetuate that understanding throughout their lives. Thank God for the folks who provide for and participate in the STARE program, a reading program that equips second graders with skills to hopefully prevent getting sucked into that pipeline. To victims, their loved ones, and those scarred by a violent society, Jesus promises God will bless you with comfort in ways you may not even imagine. Blessed are those who mourn and who trust God enough that God will restore that web of connectedness and repair the fraying fabric of our society. Rabbi Ari Goldman from the Temple Beth Shalom reported that there were 350 folks in attendance at a memorial service at his synagogue for the victims of the Tree of Life massacre this past Tuesday. And he spoke to over 100 folks gathered on a sidewalk across the street in front of City Hall. He said the support in phone calls and letters and presence has helped take the sting out of the anti-Semitic rhetoric and rise in violence. And when we read the Beatitudes, it's important to remember whom Jesus is describing to his disciples. Those who came for healing from their dis-ease, the least and the last, the downtrodden, the powerless, the oppressed. Jesus says, God's eye is on them, and they will be blessed in the end. Jesus will soon enough produce rules to live by, but for now, he shows us how to look at the people he sees with new eyes. Blessed are those whose inspiration doesn't come from rock stars or the stuff of Hollywood. Instead, it comes from the heroes of everyday, day-to-day, ordinary living. These are the saints that shape our lives. Irish theologian John O'Donohue put it this way: we were sent here to find the light of Easter in our hearts, and when we find it, we are to give it away generously. Let us pray. Dearest God, help us this day to recognize the Christ in each person we encounter, those we love and those who we find hard to love. Create in us your blessing, a smile, a handshake, a pat on the shoulder, and fill us with Christ's promise. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Amen.